Hey there, guys. Alright, today we are back with some more of the Great War. This time we're on to week 14, and it's fresh meat. The search for new recruits because everyone else is fucking dying. Before we dive into the video, though, make sure you check out the links below in the description box or in my pinned comment. Got a link to the Discord. We'd love it if you joined and hung out with us over at the Discord. That'd be cool. Anyways, that's that for the beginning of the video. Let's just dive right into fresh meat.
In the last 3 months and 2 days since the Austro-Hungarian Empire declared war on Serbia,
God, it's only been 3 months of this war. Fuck.
hundreds of thousands of men have died violently in battle. These men were the professional or trained conscript armies of Europe, but with their passing and with no end of the war in sight, the warring nations were now forced to send untrained recruits, even teenagers or middle-aged men, to die in battle like lambs to the slaughter.
Yeah.
I'm Indy Nidell. Welcome to the Great War. When we left off, we saw the Germans retreating from Warsaw, the Austrians launching and losing a big attack on the Russians at Ivangorod, the British and Germans suffering enormous losses at Ypres, the Belgians holding the line at the Ypres, and the Japanese blockading the German port of Tsingtao. Here's what happened next. On the Western Front, German Army Chief of Staff Falkenhayn had assembled an army of new recruits to...
It's crazy. They're still building the trenches. Like, we've been covering the race to the sea since what week? Before week 10, I think. And they're still going. We haven't reached the sea yet. God damn.
To fight at Ypres in Flanders. And as novices in battle up against British professionals, they had died by the thousands, marching in large masses up against machine guns and rapid rifle fire. But there were thousands more German recruits coming. And this week, the new reserve recruits managed to gain some ground further north. On October 24th, they crossed the Ypres River. Now this was really bad news for the Belgians, as the Germans could finally reach the sea. The Belgian commanders proposed retreat, but King Albert refused. The situation called for something drastic, though. And
Man is a fucking model. Hold on. Never mind. He's not that much of a model. No. Sorry, King Albert. In passing. I apologize for misleading you, thinking he might be a model, but no. A very flattering photo. But now that I look closer,
though, and after a further 20,000 Belgian troops were lost in battle, something drastic was done. The lock gates at Newport were opened at high tide to flood the surrounding land with seawater.
Oh shit, they're pulling a Dutch.
And after a few days, the Belgian countryside was flooded a mile wide as far south as Dixmude. This was impassable, and the Germans were forced to withdraw. The Allied left flank was now secure, and Albert now not only was king, he was a national hero. As a side note here, one of the ambulance drivers around the Newport area was British aristocrat Dorothy Fielding, who, for her work on the Western Front, became the first woman to win the British Military Medal for Bravery. She also received the French Croix de Guerre and the Belgian Order of Leopold II for her service. I just thought she deserved a mention here. Looking back, German hopes of reaching the sea were by now as vain as British hopes of pushing the Germans deep into Belgium. And we see further south that the battle on the Ypres salient was now the battle for the Ypres salient. Falkenhayn was still optimistic about breaking through here, and nearly did so at Neuve-Chapelle the 27th. But he was beaten back in hand-to-hand combat by Indian troops the next morning. But German reinforcements were being brought up along the whole sector, and Falkenhayn's next offensive would soon begin. See, to him, the capture of Gelluveld was essential and a prelude to the eventual capture of Ypres and the sea. In response, French General Foch agreed to send support from further south to help the beleaguered
Ooh, look at him spin that cane. What a general.
British, but it would take a few days to arrive. The Germans moved into position. I'd like to take a look at those British troops now for a minute. When the war broke out, the British regulars were the only fully professional army in Europe, but because of their small numbers, they'd initially been mocked. However, over the past 3 months, they'd repeatedly shown their capability in the field. But the race to the sea and the First Battle of Ypres would mark the end of the British regular army and usher in a period of conscription because of the following numbers. 3 months ago, British Commander John French led 84 battalions with nearly 1,000 men each. As November began, only 35 of those battalions had more than 200 men remaining. 31 had between 100 and 200, and 18 battalions were down from nearly 1,000 to fewer than 100 men. But it certainly wasn't just the British who were forced to recruit new and often untrained soldiers. In the battles of Ypres and the Ypres, the German army had sent tens of thousands of raw recruits into battle with no experience of battle or training, and their losses were catastrophic. At the cemetery of the German Volunteer Corps in nearby Langemark, the bodies of 25,000 student soldiers lie in a mass grave. There are gravestones that read such names as Musketeer Brown and Volunteer Schmidt over graves that contain several bodies each, a testament to the Kindermord bei Ypres, the massacre of the innocents at Ypres, which it was, when in a desperate attempt to break through, the Germans sent men who had no business being on a battlefield against the best trained soldiers in Europe, the British regulars. Now the British, as we've seen, had the occasional luxury of reinforcing their troops from their whole empire, but they weren't the only ones. Russia had been bringing troops from Siberia and Central Asia to fill out her ranks, and they had been arriving for the past 2 weeks, turning the tide in the east against the Germans. The Germans had been retreating from their aborted attack toward Warsaw, realizing that the sheer number of Russians was simply too much to attack for the moment. There was heavy fighting.
Kill one Russian and 10 more pop up out of the ground. That's how Russians are born, if you didn't know. They just spawn out of the ground.
Further south, though, as the Austrian army was disengaging and falling back from their huge loss to Russia at Ivangorod. Austria was, by now, in the grip of an ammunition shortage, with artillery rations down to only 4 shells a day per piece.
Oh my god. So first off, they are dealing with mass incompetence throughout the entire ranks of their society. And now to compound on that issue, they are having a shortage. How the fuck is Austria-Hungary still alive? Like, this series is making me just question how the fuck the country is even functioning at the most basic levels at this point. Because that is how incompetent their leadership here seems to be. Like, what? Are their internal politicians just so competent that they make up for the lack in the rest of their leadership or something? What the fuck is going on?
And there was a big defeatist mood among the Austrian army.
There should be, because they suck. They're just awful. They don't know how to fight.
This was compounded by an outbreak of cholera among the troops, which killed nearly 4,000 Austrians this month and weakened many more. Since it took time for the vaccine to be authorized and then distributed, many Austrian soldiers faked the symptoms to get away from the front lines. Austria further had the problem of Slavic soldiers defecting to join the Russians, seeing them as their true nation and not the multinational Austro-Hungarian Empire. So the Battle of the Vistula, also called the Battle of Warsaw, ended, and it did with a ringing Russian victory. The Germans and Austrians were pushed back to their original positions from which they'd begun their offensives weeks ago, and Russia had made up a lot for her losses to the Germans 2 months ago. But Russia would have more to deal with in the future than merely the Austrian and German empires, it seemed. For on October 29th, the Ottoman Imperial Navy bombed several Russian ports on the Black Sea. Russia might soon have a third empire to fight. There was a lot going on at sea this week, actually. The Audacious, one of Britain's most modern super dreadnoughts, was sunk by a German mine off the Irish coast. Since she took about 12 hours to sink, all crew were evacuated. But this was a real blow to the British fleet, who were much stronger on paper than in reality. And the sinking was not officially reported until after the war, for morale reasons. And Audacious still appeared in the fleet lists. However, there were American sailors on board who took photos of the ship, and the sinking appeared in the American and subsequently the world press. So the cover-up didn't do the British authorities a whole lot of PR wonders. Also this week, the German light cruiser Emden attacked Allied ships at Penang, which is now part of Malaysia. In a quick raid, the Emden sank a Russian cruiser and a French destroyer before fleeing.
Ooh, I've watched a video on the Emden before. Not on this channel, like in my own time. Like years ago. Fucking Emden is badass. Is a badass story.
The Emden was alone in the area. The rest of the German East Asia Squadron had left for Germany at the beginning of the war, and she continued her raiding adventures for another 10 days until being damaged by the Australian warship Sydney and being run aground. During her raids, Emden had captured or sunk over 20 civilian vessels and become the scourge of the local seas. Now, before I wrap things up today, I'd like to tell an unrelated side story here that I don't know where else to put. I got this from Max Hastings' book, Catastrophe. At this time in Ypres, Ronald Coleman was wounded in the leg, and the war for him was over. But he went on to become a Hollywood star. Funny thing is, his regiment also contained Basil Rathbone, Claude Rains, and Herbert Marshall, who all also became Hollywood stars. What are the odds of that? So at the end of
it's really interesting. Well, I mean, I guess because of the scale of the war, that really you see this happen also in World War II. A lot of soldiers then also going from World War II and then becoming actors. Yeah.
End of the week, the Belgians are flooding away the Germans. Further south, the British are awaiting French help while the local Germans get ready for a huge new offensive in Flanders. The Russians are on top now against both the Germans and the Austrians, but Russian ports have just been bombed, seemingly by the Ottomans. It was also around this week, in 1914, that the term no man's land appeared, describing the space between the rival trenches. So when would it stop? It was a good question. Now that hundreds of thousands of men had died, and the warring nations were recruiting teenagers and students to send into battle, when would it all stop? When would we win? Well, it wouldn't stop for another 4 years, after a shocking number of those new recruits died violently in the mud or drowned beneath the seas because, as George Orwell so simply put it, the only way to swiftly end a war is to lose it. Even though this war had taken the lives of hundreds of thousands of men, like any war, it also had its share of mythical heroes whose stories would fascinate and terrify common soldiers on both sides of the trenches. One of these larger-than-life figures was Manfred von Richthofen, a.k.a. the Red Baron. Check out this special video we...
All right. I think that's going to be where we're ended today. That was Fresh Meat, The Search for New Recruits, The Great War, Week 14. I hope you guys enjoyed. I'm loving this series still. I love this deep, extensive dive into World War I, week by week. This is amazing. I am surprised that I did not fucking know about this sooner. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more, and I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.